Let's go in Photoshop and talk about vector in Photoshop. So many of you remembers probably that I mentioned that Photoshop is more pixel based, or is really pixel based. Even the vector eventually turns into pixel when you hit print or you output it for web. But in truth is Photoshop can do vector. It has tools that allow us to do vector. That is pretty cool. So what I want to show you right now is how do you do vector in Photoshop. First of all, if I use the pen tool right here, by the way, up here, there are all the selection tools, the cropping tools, the eyedropper, the color correcting tools, and still color correcting. And then you go to a point where it talks about the text tool. The text tool is the first tool that you can have a vector. If you have a PostScript font, it's going to be a vector. There are many different kinds of fonts. I'm sure you'll do plenty of that in typography. But this is the first tool that you can pretty much have vector within Photoshop. Second one is something we know really well, is the pen tool. And this arrow key is actually the selection that we had in Illustrator for the pen tool. In fact, you can select a regular path or a subcomponent of the path. You guys are very familiar with the black arrow and the white arrow by now. And then all these tools down here are more for navigation. The grabber hand to move the image, as you can see in the preview, or the magnifying glass. So what I recommend we do is I'm going to start from the pen tool. So create a new document. Doesn't matter the settings. Right now is not about printing or anything. It's more about, it's not we're deciding the files for print or for web. We're just showing you tools. So pick the pen tool right here. And I want to show you that when you pick the pen tool, up here on the top of the screen, your options change to show you different things, basically, different things that you can do with that tool. I'm going to make it a little bit bigger. So as you can see, you can use the pen tool as a shape or as a path. Pixel is grayed out for now, but let's stick to these two. If you use it as a shape, you can have a fill and a stroke. And you can decide how big is your stroke and what is even the profile of your stroke right there, right? So this is all very familiar. It's very typical of vector, and Illustrator. So if I use the pen under this mode, pay attention what happens in the layer. Right now I have a layer called background that is locked, right? And normally when I want to input anything in Photoshop, I oftentimes create a new layer or unlock the background. Let's see what happens when I go with my pen tool right now and click and drag. Boom, and boom, and boom, and boom, and boom, right here. Now notice that background is locked and is still locked because whenever you go into this mode, Photoshop creates a vector, basically, layer for you. This little symbol on the layer that is not on the background layer is because this means it's vector, and even shows it to you because it shows you the little anchors in a square. And if I zoom in really, really closely here, you can see, I don't know if you can see fainted, a blue little line on the, so you can still see pixels, right? But there's also this blue line that runs across it. If I go under paths, it shows me that it created a new path for me that is called shape 1. So if I use it with this shape tool, that's how it works. And I can still go with my black arrow and move it around and do what I want. But this is basically a vector shape within Photoshop. So what happens if I actually go in layers again? I create a new layer this time to show you the difference. What I'm doing is I'm going to use the pen tool, but this time as a path. So I'm going to go in and click and click. I do a very different shape than the one before. Boom. So now I do have a vector again right there, right? And in fact, my pen tool shows me that turns into a plus sign here if I want to add an anchor, for example. But what I have here is I have a vector path that I can edit even on the fly. I can add, anchors, or I can go in my Y arrow and grab anchors and move them. You can see this is very familiar, very Illustrator-like. But do I have a object in Photoshop? Means what I have right here is a path, but there's absolutely no fill. There's nothing that really is going to be left there. Means in the layers, there's nothing. If, for example, right now I deselect, I go and I grab this one, I just have this kind of impotential shape. But if I go and output this, if I say, file export as a JPEG, for example, or as a PNG, and I go and let me put it in that same folder called week 6 files or something. I created a week 6 demo. So I made a PNG in there, but when I go and look at that PNG right here, there's nothing down here, right? What it means is it's really not any content. It's kind of the equivalent of when I go in with my marquee tool and I do this. There's no content yet. There is just in potential going to be something coming if I fill it. But at the moment, for this path, there's nothing, right? So how do I make it into something? If I go in the path tool, now I can see that I actually have something called work path. The shape 1 tool relates to the first shape we did. The second shape is a work path. What can I do with it? So you can go on the options right here, and you can make a selection right there. Or you can try to create a symmetry, but really making a selection is the likely option. And if you make it into a selection, you can choose if you want to feather it. I'll talk about feather in a minute. That means create a kind of a blurred effect at the edges. Or you can make sure you want an anti-alias. Remember, if I uncheck that, it's going to be hard alias, means a high contrast between the color, in this case blue, and white, versus if I choose anti-alias, it puts gradation in between, and it's going to make a new selection. So I'm going to say okay. So now is a selection. So when I go in my layers and I select that layer and I do option delete, now I have a shape in there. And when I do command D, there it is. If I zoom really closely between those two options, when I select this top option, I can see there is still a path in there, that blue line. But if I select this bottom option, there's no path. In fact, it selects it as a big square, as you can see it. Versus the one above, it selects it as, a bounding box looking thing. This is a bounding box, but it's all that's it. Versus here's a bounding box with a path in there, to the point that I can go in and still edit that path, right? I can go in here and choose the anchor points and move them. So this is still vector. This one, because I made it into a selection, is not. So remember, when you use the pen as a path, again, let me do it again just for the sake of it. Boom. Now notice I used it as a path and it created a stroke around it, because I put it on the shape 1 layer. So that's another thing you can do, is if you put it within a vector layer, now is a completely different, ballpark. But let me undo all that and show you if I actually create a new layer right there, boom, and I use the pen tool as a path in that new layer, again, is actually just a shape that has to be converted into something. The something is you go into the path, choose that work path, go in the options. Now, notice earlier we had only make a selection. Right now, if you go into the option right after you finish, one of the options it gives you here is fill path, stroke path. You have more options in there. So I could say, hey, I'm going to stroke it, and I'm going to stroke it with a pencil tool or the brush tool, and etc., etc. So you can it created right now kind of an outline. But my point is, you can do more things if you go in right after you made it. For example, let's fill the path and fill it with a foreground color. Boom. So now I'm going to ask you though. So because now I had the option to fill it, is this vector or is this bitmap? What do you guys think? Look at the layers. This is in this layer. These two are in layer 1 and 2, and the shape 1 is in the one called shape 1. So is this one, the last one we created, a vector-based object or a pixel-based object? What do you guys think?
Pixel?
Pixel, correct. First of all, we created it by using the option path, not the option shape. 2, if you look at layer 1 and layer 2, these two, they don't have this little rectangle or square symbol with the little bounding little anchors. It's basically the bounding box looking thing. This one is a shape. This one is a shape still. I can go and select it. Again, I can go with my arrow down here, choose a anchor somewhere right there and move it. But these ones are not. If I go and select them, I can move them right here, but I cannot really edit the anchors. Now, let me try to edit. It does seem like the path is still there, but this object, the fill that I created, is completely bitmap. So be aware that there's this two modality of working with path, and if you see that the path is being called shape, means it's vector based. The other two are pixel based, means the outcome is a pixel shape. Now, really, all of the three, though, when you need to output them, means when you go into File, Export, and make it into a PNG, or export for web and make it into a JPEG or a PNG or a GIF, no matter what you do here, ultimately, they're going to be all converted into bitmap. So I always joke saying the vector in Photoshop, in a way, is a bit fake, right? Because even though it is vector within Photoshop, you don't have a way to output it as vector. Even when you do a file save as and save it as a PDF, in the case of Photoshop, it will call it Photoshop PDF. That means the PDF is actually pixel-based. It's not vector-based. All right? So now, you might tell me, so why do I need to use vector in Photoshop? So let's open the file that I gave you, and I'll prove to you why it matters. If you go on your computer and dig out the files you downloaded, in my case, it's called Papaveri. Papaveri, by the way, means poppies in Italian, and that's why it's called Papaveri, because there are a bunch of poppies in there. So what I did in this file is I created what we have done in the last few classes. I took two images and I put them one on top of the other. In this case, I just did a simple command copy, command paste, right? I went in the girl file, command copied it, and then I went in this, file that had nothing else but this one layer, and I did command V, and I pasted it on top. Life is good. So what I did, though, for you, I also went with the pen tool right here with the option shape, with the option path, actually, not shape, and I created a path. So if I go under here, you'll see that you have a path. Now, how do I know that it's not the option shape? Is because if I actually did it with the option shape, let me do it with the option shape and show you the result. I said, okay, I'm going to go all around this figure with the pen tool, and the option up here is shape. Now, notice what happens here, okay? Click, click, and the third click, you can still hold the option like you did in the past. And then here, and then here, then option to release the handle, and then shift to go straight, right? You kind of know this gig. I'm going to go a little bit faster and not worry too much, because you know the gig by now. I'm going to just kind of go around right here. So I created an outline around the character, but if you look right here, it's called shape 1, and it was placed in between the two layers. If I move it above everything, you'll see that this is how it looks. So if you create it with the shape tool, now you can obviously say that you don't want a fill right here, and you don't even want a stroke. You can also say that. But what I did for you, and you'll see why I did it that way, is instead of using the shape option, and I'm going to actually delete it, what I did is I used the path option. So I did the same exact thing, but I used the path option that generated just a simple path in the path palette. You remember when I did this was the same thing. When I went with the path option, with the pen, with the path option, it didn't do anything in the layers, right? So if I go in here and I do a tiny little doodle here, it doesn't do anything in the layer, but it does create a new path right here. This work path, when I command click, is that little doodle, right? So what I did in here is I created a path. That means when I click on that path, it highlights it. You can see this blue line. So I know there is indeed a path in there. and is a vector path. So now, what if I want to create a mask in this file, and instead of selecting it with the magic wand or the stuff we've done in the past, I decided I want to use, vector. Again, you can go with your pen tool and select it, do a selection all around it with the option path, and all of a sudden you have it in here in the path palette, and then you can go in the layers under girl, and you can create a mask. Now, pay attention to what happened. Now, first of all, pay attention to the fact that I have my path active. I can see this blue line all around it. Means is on. I clicked on it, right, on the path palette. Then, I'm on the right layer, and I'm going to create a mask. Now, the first thing that it does, it creates a layer mask. But because I don't have a normal selection, the one with the marching ants, what it's doing is blank. You see what it means? It basically doesn't, it says everything is visible. When I click on it again, the second time I click on it, it creates a vector mask. That means it takes that path that was in here and it makes it into a mask. And in the path palette, it shows it by saying, girl, that is the layer name, has a vector mask on it. So that's pretty sweet. So now I know I can make masks also with the pen tool, with vector, as long as I do it this way, right? I know that I need to create the vector all around it, first with the path option of the pen tool. Then I activate that path in the path palette. And then I go in the layer and I click twice on the layer mask. The first time it's going to do a regular bitmap mask in which everything is visible. That's why it's all white. And then the second time it's going to finally do the vector mask. Is that clear to everyone? Yes? No? Everybody good? You want me to redo it? Please speak up.
It makes sense.
It makes sense. Cool. So I want to show you another little trick that is neat that you cannot do as easily with the regular masks, right? The layer mask doesn't allow you to do it as well. If you look at this little 3 dots down here and you click on it, one of the options you'll find is something called custom shapes right there. And what you can do is, right up here, you can find many different shapes, right? I mean, you can actually make your own shape. But let's use some that are already there, like leaves as a bunch of, trees and stuff. Then you have boats. Then you have flowers. You can obviously load more. But for the sake of now, and in fact, you can go in here and import shapes that you made, or append more shapes. What if I do append a default? I'm curious which one are the default. I think they're these, but yeah. Oh, no, there are more. Wild animals. Yay, I did not know that. That's pretty cool. Maybe we can do a little reindeer. So you can choose this shape, and then you can click and drag. Hold the shift key if you don't want to deform it. And now you are creating a hole in that vector mask so that I can see the poppies that are actually part of the background of that layer. You can see that, right? So let me deselect. Do you see that the little deer is showing the poppies now? So I can't see basically my winter layer below, but I also can see the girl. And if I go in with these vector shapes, I can cut holes actually through the layer below to see the real background of the girl. That's something very difficult to do in the regular, layer masks. So that's pretty neat. Let me do another one. So I'm going to go in, choose a custom shape that is maybe this time. There used to be snowflakes, but I see those are gone. But as I said, you can import custom one. I'm going to take this beautiful rose and click and drag and hold the shift key this time to constrain the proportion. It's interesting because in Photoshop now, when you create a shape, you don't need to hold the shift key, but if you bring it in as a custom shape, you do. So you can see that, you can create some neat effect with vector mask that you wouldn't be able to do with the regular layer masks, or it would be a lot harder to do with the regular layer masks. So that's one reason to use vector mask for sure, is to kind of play with these tools. And obviously you have now a new tool, the pen tool, to make a selection, because I went all around the girl with the pen tool and it worked pretty well. So life is good. And you can always edit it, right? You can go back in here and you can see that, if you go with your your direct selection tool, you can go in the anchors and move it, right? If I do this, it's gonna likely show a lot more, a lot less. Let me see if I can fix it. Oh, actually, because I already did the mask, it's not allowing me to do it. I need to do it before I hit the mask. But the bottom line is, this is kind of one way to work in Photoshop, is instead of doing the typical layer mask, you do a vector mask. Let me turn off the recording and ask if you have questions before I show you one more piece.